Hello, everyone. We are trying something new. We're trying to film in person. Today's Star Wars Day. Happy Star Wars Day.
Yes.
Cheers to Star Wars Day.
Star Wars Day, yeah. May the 4th.
May the 4th be with you. So we are starting a new series. We're calling it Rewind. And we're going to try to do it in person, like this. And since it's Star Wars Day, we decided to do a full retrospective on the original trilogy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we wanted to go back, take a look at it. It's one of our probably favorite series.
Things, yeah.
Forms of content, yeah.
Just so y'all know, this is our first time doing any sort of production in person together with lights and 2 mics in the same room. We don't have a producer or anything, so bear with us while we figure this out. We're new to this type of production, but hopefully it works out and it's fun. So we're going to break our discussion up into 3 chunks, one about each of the films. We're going to try to keep the discussion contained to the original trilogy instead of having it bleed out into commentary on the prequels and the sequels and all that. Prequels will be next year, and the sequels the year after that, so stick around for those. Happy Star Wars Day. Welcome to Rewind, Episode 1. We're excited to get started, and we're going to kick it off by talking about Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Previously just known as Star Wars. Let's get going.
What a film. I mean, yeah, it was made in 1977, written and directed by George Lucas. And he's had a lot, I mean, he did have some help with this, of course.
Yes.
It's edited by his wife at the time,
Marsha Lucas.
She actually won an award for the editing. I've seen her commonly referred to as the secret weapon of Star Wars because she just had such a big role in the editing. And I think that she gave some good suggestions when we were doing research for this episode. And, you know, we're going to talk about some broad strokes about these movies, like our general thoughts on them. But we also got some cool behind-the-scenes facts.
Yes.
Trivia. Lots of stuff to discuss.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit of trivia and behind-the-scenes stuff that we know. And there are a lot of urban legends about the making of the original trilogy that I think are very interesting, but I couldn't find firm confirmations on. Might still mention them anyway because they're interesting. But Star Wars notoriously or famously was saved in the edit. So credit to Marsha Lucas for that. Apparently, from what people have said at the time, the original cut of Star Wars was a fucking disaster. And a lot of the film was found in the editing. And this is one of those things I couldn't find firm confirmation on, but I had heard that originally in the ending of the movie, when they go to the Death Star, they just go back to the Death Star and they're fighting there. And the whole orbiting Yavin element of it was added in the editing room, which is why when you cut back to the Rebel base, like no one's talking or doing anything. They're just standing there silently. If that is true, it's a fascinating and super important addition because that ticking clock really makes the sequence crescendo in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I read something similar on that, where the initial reactions were just like, this is garbage. Like, this editing's terrible. But yeah, I think the way that she was able to splice together a lot of this stuff just helped build up that tension, actually benefited the film as a whole. Yes. And I understand that she had a role in the next movie, Empire Strikes Back, as well, and I don't know if she was as involved in Return of the Jedi. I don't believe she was.
I don't think she was involved anymore. I don't think they were involved with each other anymore at that point, but I could just be talking out of my ass. Before we get into the film, I think this is a good spot because A New Hope is the film most impacted by this, but I want to talk about the special editions and George's continued tinkering over the years because we both grew up on the special editions, I think. I had the box set of that trilogy as a kid, and that's what I grew up watching and remembering. I'll let you start, and then I'll get into sort of my complex feelings on some of it.
Yeah, because I think I grew up on both. Because I remember watching old VHS tapes with my friends and stuff that were the original. Okay. It was the original kind of edit. And then I think it was like 2005-ish or something like that when George Lucas went back and tinkered a lot and added a lot of...
Well, the 97 was the first.
Oh, 97.
Special editions came out in 1997, and I had the 3 movie box set of that, which I loved. But
then I was probably on that same one too. I wasn't entirely.
But yes, every subsequent edition he changed more. Mm-hmm. He just kept doing it.
Yes, I would say that's a lot of those subsequent edits, like past 97, are the worst parts of these movies, especially Episode 4. It gets the heaviest edit
Yeah.
out of all three from the original series. Like a lot of these decisions, these added scenes, were just terrible moves on George's part. Like the extra CGI looks way too clean. Like you'll cut from like one shot, it's got kind of that grainy-esque look to the film, and then the next scene is the extra scene or something like that, and it's just like it's so clearly like made in the lab.
Right. Well, it's like when they're entering Mos Eisley spaceport. Most of those shots that we grew up watching were added in '97, and there's just it like the special effects stand out because they look different than the rest of the film, and a lot of the CGI wasn't quite there at the time for what he was doing. But more importantly, there's just like more and more shit on the screen, and and like we don't need to see that big dinosaur thing walking in the foreground as the speeder's coming up. Like why? I understand. I think the intent, he wants it to feel like a bustling spaceport or whatever, but it didn't need that, I think. And that's the interesting part with a lot of these special edition and subsequent changes is they're always little extra things here and there, or a couple extra seconds, or an extra shot. For the most part, there are a couple exceptions, but it's kind of like, why? And rewatching the films this week, one that really stood out to me, the scene in A New Hope where Jabba enters the picture, and Han and Jabba are talking in the Millennium Falcon hangar, and the scene is weird because it's not a bad scene necessarily. I think it's fine, but we don't get any information from it that we didn't get from the Greedo encounter, and also the Millennium Falcon is just in the background because that's where they are, which in itself is not a problem, but a couple scenes later is when Luke and Ben Kenobi see the Falcon for the first time, and the camera kind of enters the space with them and pans up, and we get this nice reveal shot of the Millennium Falcon. And it really feels to me like in the theatrical edit of the film, that is meant to be the first time we see the ship, because it reveals it.
Yes.
But in the current versions that we watch, we've seen it, and it's just in the background. There's nothing special about the way it's presented. So that was a really glaring example to me of maybe George, over the decades since the original film came out, like kind of forgot why it was edited the way it was, and just wanted to like change certain things and didn't think about the consequences of them.
Yeah, or maybe he just forgot why Marcia edited the way she did, and he's like, I'm gonna add this extra stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of those Tatooine scenes, like the one where they're looking for the droids, right? And they're like, "Look, sir, droids!" They hold up the part. There's like a 2-minute scene before that, and it's just the extra CGI. It's just like
it's the lizards, right?
Yes,
yeah.
It's the stormtroopers riding the lizards in the desert. It's like, what does this add to the film? Nothing. It's literally just like George sticking it in.
Yeah.
Feels out of place, not really in line with the film or the aesthetic, because they just look too clean. It just feels jarring sometimes, and it just feels gratuitous to me. There's a lot of those scenes where I think they didn't need to add it.
Yes. On the flip side of that, though, there is a scene right before the Battle of Yavin, right before they take off, when Biggs shows up, Luke's friend from Tatooine, and they have a nice little reunion. That was a scene added in the special edition, and unlike most of these, I think that's a really good change. In the original version, presumably, he's just another X-Wing pilot, but in this, there's an extra bit of sadness when he gets killed, and it I guess, raises the tension a tiny little bit. So I think there's some moves that I think were good. Like, I think that was a good addition in Empire Strikes Back. A couple exterior shots were added of Bespin, and apparently windows were added to some of the scenes, and you could see out in the city, and I think that adds a lot to that sequence, because it makes Bespin feel more alive in a much more organic way than he did with Mos Eisley. My problem with it isn't so much that George did all of this, right? Like, it's annoying and tinkering, and as a creative, I don't like the idea of like going back to your previous work and continuously like adjusting little things. But the problem I have with it is that he's like worked very hard to make the original versions not available for people anymore, it seems.
Right, yeah.
And from the perspective of film history and film preservation, I find that really kind of disrespectful. Not to the fans, I don't give a shit about that, but to the like history of the art form. I think the films that people fell in love with in the 70s and 80s, we do not have access to. We have access to very similar films, but they're not the same. And I think that's kind of a bummer. And I also think it's kind of uncool because George was not the sole creative voice on these. He was the architect of it all, and he came up with everything. But like Marshall Lucas, Irvin Kershner, everyone who worked on the editing and the writing and everything, like George going back and making these little changes after the fact because he legally has the right to do so is kind of stepping on other people's work, and I really don't think that's that cool.
Yeah, I would agree. It seems disrespectful to the original film and maybe disrespectful to the original audience. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, just to play devil's advocate, it is his work. He can do what he wants with it. And then I think at a certain point too, as an artist, you do have like the creative freedom to go back and edit your things and publish updated editions.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, sometimes a piece of creative work is an ongoing process. It's not just a one and done thing. You need to go back to it and revisit it, update it. And I'm not saying that's the same here, like that we needed these updates, but I do think they were gratuitous at some points. Like, I think even like the Han sequence with him and
Han shot first,
is a little bit longer over time. Like I remember when I first, at least when I on this most recent rewatch, it felt a little longer than I remember.
Okay, maybe it's extended a little bit, but that was probably the most controversial one. Han shot first, right? And I have a funny anecdote about that.
Oh,
because I first watched this movie when I was like 3, and my child brain processed what happened in this scene was Han shoots Greedo, and the blaster bounces off of the wall and back at him. That does not make any sense. But I was like 3 or 4 when I first saw this movie, and I just never questioned that assumption. So when I was in late middle school, early high school, whenever like the Plinkett things were coming out, and they're like, Han shot first, I'm like, huh? What are they talking about? Han was the only one that shot. And I went back and watched the scene, and I was like, what? So I never got like ruined by the Greedo shooting first thing, because I just thought Han was the only one who shot in that version of the scene.
So you were just completely removed from...
Yeah, I had no problem with it whatsoever. But in the most recent one, this was the first time I'd watched the movie on Disney Plus, and the McClunky. What? George, what is that? Why? What are you doing?
It's integral to the film.
It's like everything about the scene is the same from the DVD version, except right before Greedo dies, he goes, McClunky. I'm like, George, why'd you do that? What's the deal, man?
He had some reason, and now he can't remember it all these years.
I think I feel like that one is just to fuck with people. Like, it's one last little thing before he ships it off to Disney, and it was in the contract that Disney can't change it.
Well, we're gonna have to work with it, guys.
Yeah, but the other addition that I really don't like is in Return of the Jedi. In the final duel, there's that great moment where Vader is looking back and forth between the Emperor and Luke, and in every version except the, I think, Blu-ray and digital release, he just picks up the Emperor and chucks him down the thing. And in the new ones, he goes, no, and he picks him up, and it's like, that's another one of those additions where, in a rare case of this, like, we got all of the emotional processing we needed from Vader's expressionless mask. Like, the scene was constructed so perfectly that we knew what was going through his head. We did not need him to verbalize it, and yet he does.
Yes. There's other like small things too, like the young Anakin being the ghost instead of the old.
That's actually Anakin. An important one.
In Return of the Jedi, that was a whole kind of thing. I think that was like after Revenge of the Sith came out, I think.
Yes, yeah, because it was with the DVD re-release, and the reason George did it, and that's another thing where it's like it feels like George was kind of forgetting the reason things were the way they were, because like in the special edition release in Empire, when Luke jumps off instead of joining Vader, in the special edition only, he screams when he's falling. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those moments where you could see, like in the 90s when George is putting this back together, it's like, it's kind of weird that Luke is just making no sound when he's falling. Let's add a scream there. But then you think about what's happening in the scene for me, it's like, no, Luke isn't scared here. He's choosing to die instead of join Vader. He's not afraid, so he wouldn't scream. So he took it back out in the next release. But with Force Ghost Anakin, the reason he added young Anakin in was because, in his words, that was the last time Anakin was good. Which, if you don't think about it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. But then you're like, but wait, I just saw him be redeemed.
Yes.
So now this doesn't make any sense because he was good again at the end. He saves the day. So Sebastian Shaw being there instead is what should have happened. And nothing against Hayden Christensen. I think he did a fine job with what he was given in the prequels, and we'll talk about him in a year. He doesn't belong in that scene. It doesn't work.
No, yeah, like it feels unearned for him to be there. And I think I remember reading like a quote online from Hayden himself of like, I had no idea that I was going to be placed there.
Really?
As far as I know from the internet, you know, and the internet's so spotty sometimes.
Yeah, very, very trustworthy.
But yeah, he was like, it was kind of a surprise to him to be.
Okay, I thought he got outfitted and everything in the costume.
Well, he was. I mean, yeah, he's in the costume and everything, but like, I don't think that when he was filming, he probably knew what he was doing. Oh, okay. It was probably like George, because
it's like, hey, Hayden, come here. We gotta do this. We're gonna do this thing.
We've got like a 5-minute scene for you to do real quick, and I'm gonna give you minimal direction, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
It's gonna be great. But some trivia behind the scenes thing. So Star Wars came to be because George Lucas tried and failed to get the film rights to make an adaptation of the Flash Gordon serial. He couldn't get that, so what he did first was he wrote a 2-page synopsis titled Journal of the Wills. And the Wills may sound familiar from Rogue One. There's the Temple of the Wills or something like that the two guys are from. That 2-page synopsis was rejected by like studio after studio. So he simplified his ideas and took inspiration from Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress and eventually created what became Star Wars. The film's original title was The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of the Wills, Saga 1, The Star Wars.
Ugh.
I think what we ended up with was a little bit better. Star Wars just rolls off the tongue, just that little bit more.
I don't know, man. The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of the Wills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. That rolls off the tongue.
It has a charm to it. But
yeah. It's got character. It's got succinctness. It's brief. Yeah. And that's the soul of wit, as we all know.
Another fun thing, though, is Harrison Ford, after having acted in Lucas's previous film, American Graffiti, he'd given up acting. He was working as a carpenter until Lucas hired him to play Han Solo.
Oh, I didn't realize that's how it went. Oh, because I knew that he was in American Graffiti.
Yes.
Never seen it. I do want to.
I need to watch it as well.
But do you know how long that gap was? Was that just like a few years?
I think it was just a few years.
Okay, yeah, because I knew that he was working as a carpenter, but yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, there's so much like cool trivia, fun facts around this, like that intercom scene with Harrison.
Oh yeah.
He didn't learn his lines for that scene because he thought it would make more like better dialogue if he was just trying to make it up on the spot of just like we're fine here,
we're all fine. How are you? Yeah. And then I love when he shoots, he's like, it's boring conversation anyway. Like it's so funny. Yeah, it just works. I love that whole sequence, I think.
Yes, it does. And I mean, we love so much of this movie. I know we kind of started off bad mouthing it a little bit, but we were more bad mouthing the George's additions.
Yeah, it's not even the additions themselves for me. It's the need to keep going back and changing things. It's and like I get it. Like I've made things, and I'm sure you've made things as well, that like given the opportunity, it was like, oh, if I made this now, I would do this and this and this. But to me, that's like, if you happen to watch my first ever YouTube video, it's a piece of shit. It's bad. If I were to make it again, yeah, I would do a lot of things differently. I even made a video later on the same topic, and I do a lot of things differently. But I don't think going back is what you should aspire to as a creative, you know? Like your earliest things are not going to be your best, you know, a lot of the time. And seeing that growth as a creator is very interesting. So it's just, that's why I have a problem with his tinkering so much. It's like, just you know, you made what you made. And it's not going to be the perfect thing you had in your head, but you made it, and it was very celebrated.
Yes. And I mean, George, you know, he was a visionary coming up with the idea of Star Wars, and the original story is just so phenomenal, and the subsequent films have been terrific. And he just basically created a whole new genre of film.
The blockbuster.
Yeah, it's a whole new version of blockbuster. It's everything. That being said, George is not perfect, obviously. And one fun fact I do have is that he's not a very communicative director. From my understanding, from accounts of the cast and everything, his directions would usually just be faster or more intense.
Yeah, I have always heard that he wasn't known as an actor's director, and there's that Mark Hamill said in interviews that Harrison Ford at one point said, "George, one of these days I'm going to strap you down to a chair and make you read your own dialogue."
Well, yeah, I remember watching a very interesting clip about like a line. I can't remember the exact line, but it was super technical, and Mark Hamill recites it from memory. It's like logistics about
the Falcon, right? Yeah.
About the Falcon traveling through space, and it's like no one's ever gonna say that.
Yeah, I think didn't Harrison Ford just say we're not doing this or something?
Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah, like just George. Sometimes his dialogue's not great, but I mean, so much of this film is just fascinating. Like how the sound design, I think, is something that just draws me in every time. Like the uniqueness of the sounds in Star Wars, like. The TIE fighter noises were made from a combination of elephant screams, elephants, and a mixture with car driving on wet cement or wet pavement. Okay. So it's like the combination of those two noises is just fascinating that you could get that unique sound. Like Tusken Raiders, their sounds are just different distortions of braying donkeys. Okay. So just those donkey noises. The blaster shots from all the guns, the pew-pews, everything, that is from metal coils, just like different sizes of metal coils, and they're just twanging noises, like just hitting them, and they're just like whatever the noise is. It's just fascinating to me.
I remember as a kid, I used to love hitting those metal coils because I thought they sounded like a Star Wars blaster, and it turns out that's because that's where the sound came from, so that's fun.
Right? Yeah, it just comes from all over the place. Like even the lightsaber noises were made by mixing together the humming of an old film projector, I think like 35 millimeter, with interference from a TV set. So it's it's just like combining all these different sounds to create stuff, and then like the clashing of them. It's like, I don't even understand like how they really made it, but like what I found online was it's a clash. It's a mix of carbon arc noises, whatever the fuck those are, and then the pressing of metal against dry ice.
Interesting.
So it's just fascinating that you can just get all these different things together like that, and then like I did have some others here, but I think that's for the other films, so we'll save that for the other ones. But yeah, there's so much of the sound design is just impeccable.
Star Wars was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, and it won 7 of them, which is pretty impressive. And another interesting thing, and this is pretty important because it kind of changed the landscape of what motivates the creation of film, was Lucas shopped around the toy rights of the films and eventually partnered with Kenner Toys and completely revolutionized the world of licensed toys. Basically, this is from the Smithsonian. There was a massive shortage of their new like 3 1/4 inch action figure line. They just didn't have enough to meet demand. So what they did for the holiday season of 1977 was they made the early bird certificate package, and you could buy you can look at pictures of this. It was like a little cardboard box, I think, and it had little cutouts of what all the characters' action figures looked like, and they were all there. So it encouraged people to order the whole complete set. The toys wouldn't even be manufactured and sent out until spring of the following year. It also, Star Wars is credited with basically launching the adult collector, basically toys as adult collectibles rather than just kids' playthings, because in the 80s, people realized they could resell vintage Star Wars toys for a massive amount of money, and so that is what started the collectible craze that led to things like the Beanie Babies.
Really?
Yeah. That became a big part of blockbuster filmmaking and stuff like that. It's like merchandising. It's like, why do you think Captain America has a different costume in every Marvel movie? Because that's a different action figure you can sell. There's no need for them to change costumes that often, but if they do, multiple variants of an action figure.
Wow, yeah, that puts Spaceballs a little bit more in different context.
Oh yeah,
there's that whole bit in it about like merchandise. That's where the real thing is. It's merchandise.
We'll see you in Spaceballs 2, the search for more money. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, and like I had a ton of Star Wars action figures as a kid, and they weren't the original trilogy like line, but I remember I had a little Luke, Empire Strikes Back Luke, and it had a detachable hand, and you could put the little thing that goes over his at the end when he it came with one of those, and after you detach his hand, you could put that thing on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Small things about the filming. The first day, when they started filming in the desert in Tunisia, the country experienced its first major rainstorm in 50 years.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine getting to the filming location and all of a sudden, wait, hold on, we gotta pause big time.
Well, we're supposed to be in a desert, and it's raining.
Not today. I just thought that was fascinating. And then those, the set design is amazing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too, but like even like some of the costuming, like the bantha that the Tusken Raiders are like riding on, the ones that you see in the film. Yeah. That's actually an Asian elephant. Okay. Like that was like trained, obviously, professionally trained, and they just had a costume with fake horns and like fur and stuff like that. Filming obviously was difficult for it, and apparently the animal kept removing parts of the costume because it was so hot.
Yeah, it was probably super fucking hot.
Yeah, and then one thing I forgot to mention about the sound design, the Jawas in this film, it's actually the language that they're speaking is Zulu, and it's just electronically sped up a little bit.
Okay, interesting.
So fascinating the way that they integrate all that stuff, and we'll get into the other films too. There's other languages used in the script too. Yeah. But yeah, let's move on. Okay. Let's get more into
talk about the actual movie. We've been talking for half an hour. But so like this is not my favorite Star Wars film. I don't think it's the best one, but I think Empire is the best of all of them. But I do think it is structurally perfect as an action adventure story, and it just kind of works on every level. Like it's a hero's journey. Lucas read The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell when he was writing the movie, and you can very much see the influence of Campbell in this. But I think the pace at which we meet all of our characters and are slowly introduced into the elements of this universe and all the factions at play, like I just think it's perfect.
Yes, yeah, I think for the time this movie really holds up very well. Special effects too, because they were using actual models like miniatures and stuff, and it's not CGI. This is like they use like quick cuts for the lightsaber effects. They use quick cuts for the doors, opening and closing. Like that stuff I think is so cool to watch. Like I think that's just really great. The set design is amazing, like the cantina setting. I know. All those aliens in there. Like I remember watching a video a long time ago of like interviews with the staff, and the first time they're going into the cantina, they're like, what the fuck kind of movie am I in? Like, is this going to end my career? Like, they're looking at all these weird-ass designs for these aliens, and then now it's just so iconic. Like,
right.
All those, like, aliens, they hold up really well for the costume design, the sound design. Everything looks and feels so good. Yeah, it's just really neat. But it still has that little, like, cheesy sci-fi B film aesthetic.
Like, it's relatively low budget, and you can see, like, then, like, there's a moment where when they're flying off of Tatooine, Han's like, I've got a few maneuvers, and then the ship just goes like straight, and it's like it's not a problem with technology because in Empire they're doing all sorts of shit with the ship. It was just a budget thing, I think. Oh, yeah. But I love that part. Is like, don't worry, I know a few maneuvers. But the cantina scene I want to talk about too, because it like Obi-Wan says to Luke when he's training, it's like, you've taken your first step into a larger world. It's like that is our first step into this larger world, because there are all these creatures and they're all doing their own thing, and it's like, this is a massive universe and we're only getting this little part of it. Mm-hmm. And that I think is what the original films do so well, that the prequels kind of start to break down on, and especially the more ancillary material now is starting to break down on it. The Clone Wars are mentioned in this movie, and it's like, it sparks your imagination. It's like, what's that? What are the Clone Wars? We don't need to see the Clone Wars. We don't need to see the fall of Vader. It just has to be mentioned. It's like, and I think that played into part of people's disappointment with the prequels at the time, because it's like they'd been imagining what this stuff could be for decades, and nothing can... Even if the thing that was given to you is amazing, it will never live up to your wildest imagination, you know? Yeah, but back to this movie, I think it's just a great... It's paced so perfectly.
Yes, the pacing is amazing in this. Even that final attack sequence, I think that is like technically like 15 minutes.
I think it, yeah.
the whole run on the Death Star, like that is so well done. The movie doesn't really slow down or stagnate. The events progress pretty quickly, and then that whole sequence, that like 15-minute long sequence, it's so well done of amping up the tension.
But the ticking clock element that we talked about earlier with the Death Star orbiting Yavin, and just the battle crescendos dramatically so perfectly to that final moment. And it's like the music, the da na na na, and like the targeting computer is getting closer, Vader is getting closer to Luke, and then at the last second, Han and Chewie come back and save the day. It's just a perfect, like, it is the perfect action sequence. I think that final battle, and so they reuse a lot of shots in it. Like the shot of entering the Death Star trench, I think we see the same exact shot 3 times. The X-Wings like turning over, the TIE fighters turning over, but whatever, it doesn't matter.
It's fine for the time, like,
and for the budget they had. That's a big thing.
It works out very well, and then I think the performances across the board, there's not one, I think, single performance that I hate.
No.
Everyone gives it their all. Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher,
Alec Guinness.
They all do great jobs. Peter Cushing.
And Peter Mayhew and James Earl Jones and David Prowse as well. Obviously different forms of performance there, especially for Peter Mayhew being Chewbacca. One thing I was thinking about when I was watching this is, if you wanted to, for some reason, there are 1,000,001 things you could nitpick about this movie.
Yes.
And it's like when they're in the trash compactor and the walls are closing in, it's like realistically, the other trash in that room is going to crush their legs and they'd all die. And there are little things like that, but it's like we don't talk about it because it doesn't matter. And we're all smart enough to realize it doesn't matter because the film, despite all of those things, is incredible. But I just know if this movie had come out this year, the logical internet boys would be going frame by frame, being like, well, you see, this it's right here, this doesn't add up, it's not perfect. It logically, if you think about it this way, they wouldn't be. It's like, shut the fuck up, because they do that. They're like, it's like when they pick apart the Last Jedi throne room scene, right? It's like, yeah, is it silly that guard spins around instead of like going for a kill shot on Rey? Yeah, who gives a fuck? Nobody is genuinely upset about that. And if you are, go outside.
Yeah, go have some fun. Go find something to do that's not just analyzing this film to death. And I mean, yeah, like you're saying, the worst parts of this movie are those little nitpicky things. Like, why is Leia comforting Luke over the death of Obi-Wan when her entire planet was just genocided? Like, he should be the one consoling her. Like, everyone should be consoling her. Or like the categorical incompetence of the Empire's stormtroopers. These guys are so terrible at their jobs. Somehow they have millions of them, and it's like, what are we doing? There's something wrong here. Or even like the dialogue at times, like kind of what we were just saying with some of those lines. Like some of this dialogue is just a little clunky, but it still delivers pretty.
It does. It's goofy and like silly, but it works in the context of what's going on, So it's hard to get upset about it.
Yeah. And I mean, when he created this film, George, he wasn't, I think he was still kind of a little bit on the fence about making another one. He obviously put a lot of money into this and put a lot of time and effort, and he had already drafted the entire, I think, story for the 3 films.
He likes to say that.
Yeah.
I don't believe him. I think he had like ideas of things he would like to do, but when he says like, "Oh yeah, I had it planned out from the beginning," it's like, no, you didn't. You would not have had like Luke and Leia kiss as many times as you did if you had an idea of where this was going. Yeah. Because they kiss quite a lot.
Yes, not just in episode 5 and episode 4.
In episode 4, they kiss at least twice.
Yes, yeah, before they swinging, and then like before the trench scene. And the movie still has like that, like I was saying, the cheesy sci-fi B movie stuff, like Vader's armor, for instance. It's not perfect. Like,
it's very cheap.
It looks a little cheap, but it still looks good. But like you can see, like it's the smudges. Like,
yeah, they're like handprints on his face mask and stuff like that.
Okay, that's a little weird. But like some of the film, I feel like it feels like it has a little bit of that retro 70s grain on it. So it just kind of adds a little bit more to that, to it as a film, I would say. And that kind of makes those extra scenes like we were talking about stand out a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, and just a couple final things on it. I want to talk about the Obi-Wan Vader duel, because over the years, a lot of people kind of shit on this duel a little bit as being like, oh, it's just, the choreography's boring and it's stupid. And I was like, I don't agree. I think the fight is exactly what it needs to be. It's not overly complex, like if you put it up against the choreography of the Duel of the Fates. No, it's much simpler, and the props are probably very brittle, and they had to be careful.
Yes.
But again, people always talk about this, or we always talk about it too, where the lightsaber duels themselves are not about the fight as much as they are about the dynamics of the characters in the scene. And even despite that, I think the choreography works just fine. But we get a clear sense of where Vader and Obi-Wan's relationship is, and Obi-Wan's sacrifice to let Luke and them escape works great. So emotionally, the scene works on every level, I think.
Yeah, because the duel isn't about the action here, and if it was more action-packed, I'm sure people have seen those videos online, I think some people
they did the
edits of their own of just more intense fights where Vader's super powerful, he's swinging like crazy, bumping into the walls, wreaking all this damage and stuff. It doesn't fit tonally.
No, the people who do that are masters at the art of missing the point.
Yes.
The point of these fights is not complex choreography, and they just add 3 minutes of admittedly cool looking choreography to a fight that didn't need it. It's like reverse editing.
Yes.
It's like what George does with the special editions. It's that.
You're kind of missing the point of the movie and the scene in general. Yes. The scene is about sacrifice, and just because something is epic and over the top, it doesn't make it better. The duel on Mustafar in the 3rd episode, it's visually really cool, but it's 15 minutes long, and at a certain point you're like, okay, I know what's going to happen here. Yeah. Why is this taking so long to get to this point?
Right. And the Plinkett reviews talk about this, and they play a clip from the people editing the sequence, I think, and it's they even say when making the movie, we get to a point in the fight where the emotional arc of the scene has concluded, and then they just keep fighting. Another one thing I want to close on is just rewatching it this week. Nearly every musical cue in this movie got me to tear up just a little bit, And I think John Williams' music is spectacular through the whole series, but he created an entire musical landscape in this film alone, which is shockingly impressive, and I think it contributes quite a bit to the nostalgia we have for the original trilogy and this film in particular. It's just so brilliant, the binary sunsets, especially. And everything. It's so good.
If they had a different composer, this would not have been the same movie.
No, it might not have been a bad movie, but there is no Star Wars as we know it without John Williams.
Yes, he was just as integral as the actors, the directors, the writers. So, yes, kudos to him. But yeah, I think that wraps up our thoughts on episode 4. You want to move on to the next episode in the series?
Yes, I do. The Empire Strikes Back. The second film in the original Star Wars trilogy, released in 1980, directed by Irvin Kershner, and written by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas.
Yeah, whole great film. And then Irvin.
Oh, and Lee Brackett. Sorry, Lee Brackett as well.
Lee Brackett, yes, also helped out with the writing there. And fun fact about Kasdan: so Kasdan co-wrote The Force Awakens, and also Solo, A Star Wars Story. So he's been pretty involved, and then he also played a writing role in Return of the Jedi as well. Correctly. But yeah, Irvin, interesting choice as a director. The cast stated that he was their favorite director. The original cast out of the original trilogy, they said he was their favorite director to work with. He was super helpful and supportive. Definitely a little bit of a contrast with George. It sounded like Irvin was a little bit more active during the filming process and would give a lot more direction to his actors. And he actually was one of Lucas's instructors in school.
Okay, interesting.
And Irvin initially turned down the directorial role, but then his agent was like, "No, you should take it." So he eventually turned around.
You know what they called him on set? This is not a joke. They called him the Irv.
The Irv?
Yep, they called him the Irv. Mark Hamill's talked about that. Apparently, this was the only Star Wars film to use someone other than Ian McDiarmid as Emperor Palpatine. So that is some little trivia for you.
Yeah. The if I remember correctly from the research, it was a woman who played him, but they had like superimposed eyes on him, and then someone else did the voice. I can't remember the name, but then I think in the updates.
Yeah, in current editions, it's now Ian McDiarmid.
But it's very interesting that this was the only one without him initially. Also, and going back to the sound design again, because there's a lot of new noises in this in this film. Tauntaun noises. You always wonder where those came from. Asian sea otters.
All right.
Yeah, distorted Asian sea otter noises. The Minox. So when they're trapped in the asteroid field, they're inside the giant worm on the Falcon, the space worm, and they're being attacked by these Minox that are just like trying to siphon off power from this ship. Those sound effects for those creatures are actually horse noises played backwards. Which I did not know until we started doing the research,
Okay, good to know. Apparently also Mark Hamill banged his head on the ceiling of Yoda's hut about 16 times during shooting. That's very funny. Another thing, this has long been a theory because, as a lot of people know, Mark Hamill was in a very serious car accident in between A New Hope and Empire. And a lot of people's theory for a very long time was that the first thing that happens to Luke in Empire is he gets assaulted by a Wampa, and then he breaks out and everything. And people always said or thought that it was to address why Mark Hamill looks a little bit different from the reconstructive surgery on his face. Apparently, that's not true. That's a myth from what I've come to hear. Wow. So it's just coincidental.
I always assumed that as well. That was the reason why. That's interesting, though. Didn't know that. We'll get into like the things that we love most about this movie as well. But we like to talk about the trivia initially because that's what we got down here. That blizzard in Hoth, the one that Mark Hamill stumbles out into, that was real. Okay. That was not like a practical effect or CGI. That was an actual blizzard in, I believe they filmed it in, I want to say Finland, or at least somewhere in Scandinavia. I can't exactly remember, but no effects were used on that. And then one of the fun facts that I found, they saw that the blizzard was happening, and they had kind of Mark stumble out into the snow and do his thing, but they filmed it from like the hotel. So from my understanding, they were like a little bit nicer and warmer, a little bit more protected, and Mark was just kind of stumbling out there. I have no idea.
Sounds awful.
I can't confirm all that. I might be butchering some of that, but yes, all the snow, not a practical effect. That's all real stuff. Mark's wife was pregnant at the time, and she actually gave birth while they were filming this. And it was the same day that they filmed the scenes of him climbing outside of the snow, like the snow speeder, before it got stomped on, by the AT-AT. Which is also a scene where I think I heard that he broke his thumb during filming that. But like he basically that day he went and was there for the birth of his children, and then went to set to film.
Good for him.
Same day kind of deal.
Big day for Mark.
Yeah.
And it looks like the AT-ATs, the big dog walkers, as I used to call them as a child before I knew what they were called, were inspired by the walking machines in War of the Worlds. I did not know that. That whole Hoth battle is a great sequence. I'm sure we'll talk about it in a minute. But one thing I wanted to mention is iconic moment from the end of this film, right before Han goes into the carbonite freeze. Leia confesses her feelings for him, saying, "I love you," and he responds, "I know." The line in the script was, "I love you too," but apparently, according to Irvin Kershner as well, Harrison Ford did not feel like that was in line with what Han would say, so he ad-libbed the script and made it "I know," creating one of the most iconic character moments in all of Star Wars, I would say, and a good call by Harrison Ford, It was the right move.
I mean, that is so much more in line with his character and like what we already know about them as they've developed this relationship. Like he's always been cocky with her and very like, I don't want to say like forceful, but more aggressive.
He is a little bit aggressive.
He's aggressive with kind of pushing this relationship on her.
Yeah, the way he behaves is one of the probably the more dated aspects of Empire, I would say. It's not super appropriate. But with the "I love you, I know" thing specifically, it has a nice little echo, it rhymes in Return of the Jedi, because he tells Leia, "I love you," and she says, "I know," right before she wastes some stormtroopers.
That is a pretty good parallel.
So it's a nice, it's cute, it's great.
It is. And then one other fact that I found very interesting, actually, was in the initial ideas for this movie, when they were starting to, like, George was starting to figure it out, plan it out, one of the first ideas was with Lando Calrissian as a character, when they were introducing him, have him be a clone that survived the Clone Wars. And I honestly am glad they didn't take that direction. Mm-hmm. I think that the direction they took was a lot better, and that would have been kind of more shoehorned in, I think. And that gave us the opportunity to get the prequels, explore it in different films and stuff like that. But I don't know, I just thought that was very interesting that was one of the original ideas.
Yeah, that would have been interesting, but I kind of agree because it allowed them to creatively leave their options open for what the Clone Wars were and what clones are. Ultimately, I think the clones probably could have been more interesting than they were in the prequels. At least the cartoons do the clones very well, I think. Yes. But the prequels themselves, the clones are whatever. The last thing, nominated for 4 Academy Awards and won 2 of them. And I think we both agree that this, I think, is the best Star Wars film. And I consider A New Hope to be the second best, and my third is Last Jedi. But this is, I think, the pinnacle of what Star Wars has been.
Yes, I think so too. Like, this was, in my opinion, the best Star Wars movie. It's my favorite Star Wars movie, and there's a lot of reasons why. We can dive into that in just a second. But I think, this movie, just like A New Hope, I have such sentimental value for, like, growing up with it. Like, I feel like I watched this movie 1,000 times. I played Star Wars video games and replayed the Hoth episode.
In Rogue Squadron? Was it Rogue Leader or Rebel Strike that had the Hoth sequence? Because I remember you had to fly, whichever one it was, you had to, like, fly around them 3 times with the tow cable, right?
Yes, that was always a good time. Yeah, you had to do 3 times, and then Battlefront, like, I played that game to death, 1 and 2, and would play those Hoth missions so much. So.
And the new one, this motherfucker. You remember when Battlefront 2 came out, the reboot Battlefront 2, and you had to, like, it was absurd to grind and get every character to the point where they eventually patched in catch-up mechanics and stuff. This guy got every character on my game before that. He played it so much.
I was obsessed.
He was obsessed. I got to play with all the heroes without having to do any of the work and spending any money, so fine with me. But
you're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome for how much you played that game. I was the one who loved it. But yeah, the Hoth sequence, I think, is probably my favorite sequence in all of Star Wars. Okay. That whole attack on Hoth, like them just getting everything together and escaping. I honestly tear up sometimes when I watch that sequence. Like, this time, it is the sentimental value for me. It's just how much I've related to it and the nostalgia for it. But I think there's just so many things that went right with that sequence. Just like the cinematography, the pacing, the dialogue is wonderful, the performances are wonderful, but, like, again, it doesn't stop. The action keeps going and going and going and going, and it builds and builds and builds, and you get this great escape of the rebels just, like, running off, and it's just phenomenal.
So what was it about that sequence that, like, makes you so emotional? Is it just, like, it's just a part you loved as a kid that you connect with, or was there any specific thing?
I don't know if there's a specific thing, honestly. I think it's a combination of things. I think it's the amount of time that I spent ingrained in that specific area of Star Wars. Okay. I think that has a big deal for me, but I think the concept is also so profound at that moment, because this is the rebellion here on this base. If they are wiped out here, that's the end.
Yeah, it's kind of desperate.
This is them escaping on, like, their last lifeline. They're finally getting out. Like, they were hidden for so long, and then the Empire finally finds them, and the Empire is just so vast, and they just dominate. They crush. This fleet arrives at desperate times, call for desperate measures, and they're able to get out. And it is tough for me to say why I like it so much.
But it does, I think it really highlights how scrappy the rebels have to be, because as a kid I didn't really pick up on exactly what was going on, but, like, they're being very resourceful with the tools they have available to them. It's like they can't damage the walkers, so they have to use tow cables. Like, cables meant for towing other ships, and that's how they win. It's how they survive the day, really. And the whole battle is just, like, buying enough time to escape. And I love the little touch when as they're evacuating and everybody's running through the hangar over the loudspeakers, like, the first transport is away, and they're like, yay! I love stuff like that. But I also, structurally, I love that and we'll talk about this more later, but the temptation with a lot of sequels, I think, is do the same thing again, but do it a little bit bigger, and then it's just that's why a lot of sequels feel so samey, and that's where Empire stands out, I think, because we have our big battle set piece at the beginning here, and the rest of the film is much more subdued.
Yes, yes, that's true.
And our plot is now, it splits our heroes up. We have our A plot with Luke Skywalker training on Dagobah, and our B plot with Han and Leia and Chewie being pursued by the Empire. I think some of the best Star Wars moments come from these two sections, especially the training sequence on Dagobah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the puppetry of Yoda is phenomenal. Like, I read a fact that, like, Lucas really pushed, like, he did, like, kind of a whole Oscars campaign to try and get him, like a nomination or an award. And I think it was even for, like, a supporting actor or something like that. But I think there's pushback because it was like, well, it's technically a puppet, so it's not him, but it is.
It is. It's so alive. The Yoda puppet is like, you never for a second doubt that it's a living creature, I don't think.
It's so beautiful, and like just they're able to work in humor to his character, like he's just trashing Luke's shit, like he's just like just his little laugh is so funny, like I chuckle during that sequence. But the idea of Yoda is the perfect way to communicate what a Jedi warrior could be
and what the Force is, really. And and like the Red Letter Media talks about this a lot, but I think they're really right on the money about this. By making Yoda a little guy, it's telling us that the Force is something beyond the physical. It's you can be immensely powerful in the Force and not be physically imposing. And also the whole sequence is teaching us about Luke. Yoda is testing Luke when he's fucking around with this camp. He's not just having fun. He's poking this guy and seeing how he reacts a little bit, and Luke kind of disappoints. Luke does not live up to what he needs to in a lot of this sequence. Like, I don't believe it. That is why you fail. We learn so much about the way Luke thinks and operates in this sequence, just via how he reacts to the tests Yoda puts in front of him.
Yeah, I mean that the cave sequence where he goes underground and he fights basically himself, but in the Vader costume. It's such a great cautionary tale and lesson, and I think, you know, you could dive into like Reddit, like a subreddit about this for like an afternoon, because there's a lot of like things that you can pull out of that. Like Luke brings his weapons into the cave with him. It's told, don't bring your weapon in, like, or like
what's in there, only what you take with you. He brought combat to the encounter unnecessarily.
He brought combat and fear into it, because if you bring in a weapon, you need it for defense. That's your intention. So it's that combat and that fear element. But then, like, he's fighting himself basically down there. He's not fighting Vader. It's just himself. So it's like kind of a cautionary tale of this is what you could become if you don't follow through on your training and actually listen to the wisdom that Yoda's giving you and think more about controlling your emotions. You're so out of control right now, and there's so many ways that I think you could interpret the lessons that he learns in the cave sequence.
Right, and it plays into Return of the Jedi too, because the Emperor is very much goading Luke in that film to replace his father, and we'll talk about it more when we talk about Jedi in a little bit, but he has that moment where he realizes, oh no, I'm becoming my father. He sees the robotic arm, and he looks at his hand, and that this moment very much foreshadows what could happen with that. And Luke, through his whole life, as we find out in the sequel trilogy, both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness is his love for his friends and family. And that puts him in danger in this movie. Obi-Wan and Yoda are lying to him about who his father is, but they're doing so because emotionally he is not ready for that yet. He's not ready to deal with that yet, and that's the real danger of him facing Vader in this film, is that Vader can use that as a weapon against him because Luke is not emotionally mature enough to deal with it.
Yes, he's unbalanced.
But there's also some really good, like, physical activity and, like, flips and shit that he's doing, which is fun to watch.
Well, yeah, I mean, him lifting all the rocks and stuff with his mind, like lifting R2, doing all this balancing, it's like just really cool filmmaking, and just like, I don't even know how they did all that, but I mean, it's just wires, I'm sure.
It's just wires and stuff.
It looks cool. It looks cool in the shots.
There's some great matte paintings on Dagobah, though. Great matte paintings, great sets. Yoda's little hut the cave itself, all of it's just wonderful.
Yeah, the symbolism of the world's beautiful, and then at the same time we have our B plot with Han and Leia and C-3PO and Chewbacca on the Falcon, which is experiencing a lot of technical difficulties.
And it's the more like adrenaline part of the plot, because the Luke stuff is very slow and introspective, and this is more like on the run the whole time, which I think is very fun. And I do love the recurring issue that the Falcon is just totally broken.
Yes.
And it acts as a contrast because every time Han tries to go to light speed, it just reminds me of in The New Hope when he punches it and they escape the Star Destroyers as they're leaving Tatooine. It's just like a joke almost. It's like, oh, we're almost out. Oh, no.
Oh, we can't get out.
And then even at the very end, it's like you're ready for this release of tension. Like they've rescued Luke and they're on the way, and Lando's like, all right, let's punch it, and it doesn't work. And he's like, they told me they fixed it. It's not my fault. Like Han says that earlier in the movie, just like, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's so funny.
It's like poetry, it rhymes.
like Empire, this is not a part of Empire. People talk about it a lot, but like it's very funny. Like it's funnier than the first one.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of good comedic beats along the way. Like we got C-3PO has always been kind of our comic relief, but it feels like, Han's getting in some good quips, Lando's getting in some good quips. C-3PO is still giving it, with the humor angle. But yeah, it's very funny. There's lots of good jokes throughout it. And that Falcon, too, I looked this up. It's actually one big life-size set.
Okay.
That whole thing. It's like, it weighs like so much.
So they built out the whole interior as well as one thing. Okay.
It's this whole thing. Like, it wasn't the same in the first film. Like, I think they only did like the cockpit and like a few like smaller sets. Yeah. And then I think in Return of the Jedi they only did like a small thing too. I don't know if they went back and reused.
In Return of the Jedi, I was going to mention this there, but I'll just mention it here because who cares? I read at one point that the like full-size exterior set of the Falcon burned down. I couldn't find any confirmation of that, but I think it was damaged to the point where they couldn't use it or something like that. And they were like, well, we only really need it for this one scene where Han and Lando were talking to each other outside of it, so they used a matte painting. It's a beautiful matte painting. It's really good.
Yes, that's
but
right,
but you can tell that it's like a matte painting. If you watch as they separate from each other and Lando walks towards the Falcon, he kind of at the very end of the shot, he just kind of stops walking. And I guess because he'd gotten to the painting and he couldn't go any farther.
Like, what do you want me to do, George?
But yeah, and we also, this is our main relationship building between Han and Leia. This film, it doesn't say in the movie, but we know from other things, it's 3 years after the original film. And in that time, I guess like some interest has been building. At this time, there was still a love triangle in the story, which is odd in retrospect, but it is what it is.
Okay.
But yeah, I do love the Han and Leia dynamic here a lot. I do think Han is a little bit too aggressive.
He's laying it on pretty hard.
Yeah, but this movie came out 43 years ago, so I'll cut it a little slack.
Yeah, it's like you couldn't do that kind of relationship today, or at least you'd need to be a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, you would need to be more. Han would need to tone it down a little bit, or the story would probably need to be about how Han is being too aggressive. You could do both of those things.
Yeah.
But I think despite that, it still works really well, and I believe their romance quite a lot. That one scene of them in the hallway of the Falcon is such a great romantic moment, and then of course C-3PO fucks it up for them, and I love it. It's like. And Han's face when 3PO's interrupting, it's like, thank you so much. And it's like, fuck you.
Get all the way out of here. You're blocking me here, man.
Fun escape sequence. We get a lot of fun stuff with Vader, and we get to see his management style. Manager from hell, Darth Vader.
You fail me, you die. I don't care.
I love when like the Falcon gets away and like is hiding, and it's like, I'll apologize to Lord Vader myself, and then it cuts to him, Vader, like the guy falling on the ground. He's like, apology accepted, Captain Vita.
Like, Jesus Christ. Okay.
But the asteroid belt scene is a lot of fun, and a couple things about that. This sequence, there's a thing that we see in this movie that everybody loves, and that thing would be bombs in space. I just want to mention that here for a moment. And also, another related thing, So when they're hiding in the crater, right? So they go outside to deal with the Minox, and they go outside in nothing but little like breather thingies, right? And of course they're in the belly of a worm, right? And it's probably a little warmer in there because it's inside of a living being. Yeah. They don't know that though. They waltzed out into space, cold ass space, in nothing but a little breathing mask. So I have a theory about space in Star Wars, and my theory is that the temperature of space in Star Wars is not as cold as it is in our universe. Because otherwise, why would they have gone out without temperature control or something, you know?
Yeah, it's a good point.
So you, watching, keep that and Bombs in Space. Just put a pin in that for 2 years. We'll come back to it. And moving on.
Yeah, all right. I think we've talked about a lot of different things with this film. So, Dylan, let me ask you, why do you think that that Episode 5 is so widely regarded across the Star Wars fan base, but by our viewers and everyone at home? Why do you think it's the most popular, considered the best?
A couple things. One, I think it resisted the urge to do what I talked about earlier, the same but bigger approach. It's a very different film. It dives into the nuances of the Force. It's really the first time we're actually learning about the Force, because A New Hope doesn't get into it all that much. It's very vague.
Very broad.
And the Force is a soft magic system, so we never know exactly what can be done with the Force and stuff like that. That alone, I don't think is enough to make it like the best. I think it's just the character stuff and the amount we see with them, and the fact that it is kind of a bold new approach, and it expands our understanding of what Star Wars was.
Yes.
Like, we leave Empire Strikes Back, despite being a small story, our understanding of the universe is so much bigger, and our understanding of the people within it is so much bigger. And you get the twist about Vader. Yes. Like, that's a big thing. But I do know, like, a lot of people were pissed leaving the theater for this initially.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was a lot of resentment that the love triangle plot was resolved already, and there were apparently Luke Leia shippers and Han Leia shippers, and they didn't really see eye to eye on a whole lot of stuff, so the Luke Leia shippers are probably a little pissed off. Okay. Just wait until the next one. Yeah. But yeah, what about you? What do you think sets it apart and makes it... I think it's one of the best sequels ever made. I think that plays into it as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think that does play into it, because I think at the time audiences were so used to, like you were saying, the sequel just being like a soft reboot of the last one, but just like bigger, like more special effects, more budget, more everything. And so it would just be kind of a redundant formula. Yeah. This one flipped that on its head and just created it was even better than the original because of the structural changes. The structure is very effective, and I agree with you. I think the character development across the board for Luke, Han, and Leia is just phenomenal, and it just is very effective. Yeah. Even the droids, I think, get a little bit of development, but they don't change too much. They're just droids. Right. And Luke, he grows, he matures. And then he kind of becomes positioned directly as the opposite to Vader. He does evolve past that farm boy from Tatooine that we knew from the last film, but he's still got plenty of growing up to do. He obviously lost. There's a lot of loss in this film too, which I think is...
It's the darkest hour. Like if we're looking at the hero's journey and the 3-act structure, and if we look at the original trilogy as one story, then this is very much like the darkest hour moment of the story, where all is lost, right? The rebellion is scattered. Luke's vision of his father is completely destroyed. He's lost his hand and his lightsaber. Han is captured,
All of our characters are at their lowest point, and I don't think that a lot of sequels at the time were bold enough to do something like that, where it's like, okay, now we're going to take ourselves into the lowest point.
Right. And leave you there.
Yes, and leave you there on such a big cliffhanger of like, okay, what's going to happen next? So I think that really played into it. I think the expansion of locations also helped too. Like the last time, we only saw the Death Star and Tatooine. And
Yavin.
And Yavin. And this time we're getting Hoth. We're getting an ice planet. We're getting... asteroids, we're getting Dagobah, we're getting a cloud city. Like, we're going to these new strange places. Yes. We're getting some new characters like Yoda. and Boba Fett to a certain extent. We're getting Lando.
Well, we get the relationship between the Imperial Authority and these bounty hunters.
Yes.
And the fact that they will contract out to someone like that.
Yes.
And we also get another, like, in the same way that Obi-Wan talks about the Clone Wars and the history of Anakin and stuff like that in the first film. In this one, we get, like, little fun things, too. It's like, I thought you had decided to stay. It's like, yeah, well, that bounty hunter we ran into on Ord Mantell changed my mind. Yeah. We get little cheeky nods to things that have happened in the interim. Like, these characters have grown a little bit. This trilogy especially, I think, masters the feeling that these characters have lived without us for a little while, but also not developed past the point where it would be jarring to see them again.
Yes.
And contrast that with, like, the jump between episode 1 and episode 2, I think that's a big problem with Anakin, is he's basically two different fucking people in those movies, and we never have that issue here, but we still get the sense that time has passed and they've been on journeys together.
Yes, yeah, they've had their adventures. And again, like we said with A New Hope, musical score is excellent. Mm-hmm. John Williams definitely helps make this movie feel the way that we want it to.
Yeah. The Imperial March first appears in this.
Oh my god, the Imperial March.
Basically becomes the Empire and Vader's themes going forward a little bit, I think.
Yes.
It's so good. But the Empire duel itself, we should talk about that.
The Empire duel is magnificent.
It might be my favorite duel in the trilogy, just because the atmosphere is so good. Like the lighting in the carbonite chamber, especially, like that the orange smoke and the blue backlights, and then it just goes when Vader is just throwing shit at Luke, and he's just like sweaty and bloody, and he can't do anything, and he just gets knocked out the window. It really hammers home like how unprepared he was.
Yes, he is out of his comfort zone. He's like outmatched. Vader's superior to him in his technique and his abilities with the Force. So he's obviously like at a disadvantage. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I like this fight scene too because it bounces around from locations so well. It's not just kind of like we're fighting and we continue fighting and we continue fighting, like Mustafar, like going back to that again, where it's just like continuous. You're going from one location to the next. There's no stopping. This one says, okay, let's give our audience a moment to breathe between the carbonite chamber and then the hallway and then like him out on the balcony where he gets his hand chopped off. Right. So we get these like brief moments of reprieve between
tension.
Yeah, very.
Where is Vader in those moments of calm?
So it raises that tension of like, okay, where is he? And then like, and then all of a sudden he comes out of nowhere. It's like,
I do love that moment because it's like it very much implies that Vader was just like standing very still in this little
holding his breath,
just waiting.
Because all of a sudden the sound effect comes back. It's like, oh shit! So you were either holding your breath or you were suffocating yourself somehow.
But it goes back to the what we were talking about earlier with choreography, because the choreography here in this fight is very much informed by the dynamics between the characters. And Luke's dialogue, like, you'll find I'm full of surprises. Like, he's so fucking arrogant in this fight at the beginning. Yes. And he's very aggressive in his stance, and you can tell he's working very hard. Where Vader is more or less just kind of standing still, and with one hand just kind of like, he's just fucking with him. He's just messing with him. He could kick his ass at any time, but he's just having fun. He's playing with his food.
He's with his son. Yes. He's having a good old father-son game of sword-ing.
Well, and Vader knows that at this point, so he's just keeping that in his back pocket for the opportune moment to drop it on him.
It's amazing. And I think, to a certain extent, why I also think that duel is excellent, and then also the film is excellent, is because of the director change. Yeah. They chose the right person bringing her Kirshner, because he obviously had a big influence on the film. He thought through every piece of cinematography, like how to position the camera, like what are we communicating in this shot, what's being communicated in this scene. He was obviously the favorite director of the original staff, so I think that obviously influences like how the actors are going to perform and how they're going to portray the characters. And he just seemed like he was able to be more intentional with just every aspect, the shots, and how that corresponded with the dynamics of the characters. Yeah. So I think, Kirshner definitely elevated this movie above what it could have been with someone like Lucas.
Right. Well, I agree, but that's also what I like about Lucas at his best is he's an excellent collaborator. Yeah. And he's always said pretty openly, like, he's not the greatest director, and he's not the best at dialogue or the best with actors, but when he is at his peak, he's aware of that, and he collaborates with people who can elevate where he couldn't. And he tried collaborating the entire time, but I think there was a power dynamic during the prequel era that maybe made it harder to collaborate with people. Yep. And we'll talk about that more next year. I want to talk about the Vader as Luke's dad twist specifically. Sure. One, because it was such a tightly guarded secret. Apparently Lucas, Kasdan, Kirshner, all met with Mark Hamill, and they said, so the three of us know something, and we're going to tell you. And if it leaks, we know it was you. And they tell him who it was because on the set, David Prowse, who was the body of Vader, says Obi-Wan killed your father, apparently.
Oh.
So it wasn't until James Earl Jones did his voice work that the actual line was put in. And Mark Hamill's talked about this in interviews where when the cast was watching it for the first time and that happens, and he said, Harrison Ford leaned over to me and I was like, you didn't tell me about that, kid.
It's like, oh, yeah, sorry, buddy. Couldn't risk it.
But it's such a wild twist, and it is kind of, as far as twists go, we've talked about it before, where it's like if you're playing fair with your audience, you put the hints there so that they can figure it out if you want. Does this twist play fair? No. But because in A New Hope, I will say it definitively, Darth Vader is not Luke's father in that movie.
No.
Absolutely not. He killed Anakin Skywalker in that movie. According to the text of that film, there is no question. Yes. But this twist is so good that it is the exception to the rule, I think, where it's like, yeah, they cheated a little, but it's good.
I would agree. Yeah, like, there's nothing really in this film that gives it away.
No.
Like, you could maybe say, oh, he's passionate about finding Skywalker because it's his kid, but there's nothing in the film up until that moment that says it's my
right.
son. Yeah.
But it's also not a twist that's put in there just for surprise, right? It's, I think, the right storytelling decision for this character, because Luke, in a lot of ways, is trying to follow in his father's footsteps. I'm a Jedi like my father before me, yes. He says in Return of the Jedi, and he's interested in his father in the first film, and Obi-Wan talks about him fondly. So taking that away from him is what the character needs to be punched in the gut and put at his lowest moment, where in the sequels, there's sort of the opposite of that twist. And for me, I think that's what that character needed to put her at her lowest point. We'll talk about that in 2 years. But I just want to mention that it's like, you don't, like, the twist is not motivated by playing with the audience as much as it is about the character and what is needed for their story. Yes. And I think that is probably why Empire's twist lands so well.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, Empire's just so good. Like,
oh, it's phenomenal. It is the best Star Wars movie. No one can argue about that with me. Like,
I agree, and I love The Last Jedi. I think it is one of the best movies in the whole saga. But Empire, it's Empire.
Yeah, it's tough to top this one.
Yeah.
But what do you want to transition to our final movie to discuss today?
I think it is that time. So we will see you when we talk about Return of the Jedi shortly. Released in 1983, directed by Richard Marquand, who directed Jagged Edge and died in 1987, you said. So not long after this film, actually. I did not know that.
Unfortunately, Jagged Edge was the most notable film that I saw in his film history. But yes, this was also written by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas. Interesting film overall. I think it's probably the weakest of the three.
I agree, yeah.
But,
it's still good, though. Still, like, it has some of the best Star Wars stuff in it, but it has some things that drag it down a little bit more than the previous two did. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, let's do some fun trivia and behind-the-scenes stuff. Take it away.
Yes. So one of the fun things that I love about this film is the use of real languages, which we kind of talked about before with some of these other films. So the language that Nimdyab, Lando's co-pilot, it's actually a real language. It's a Kenyan dialect called Haya, which is really neat. So yeah, it's just really neat how they were able to include that, with the Jawas as well, having their own kind of real language. Another thing that I thought was really funny, actually, so the Emperor's chair in the throne room scene. So it was supposed to be mechanized and actually turn on its own. Didn't work. So Ian McDiarmid,
You have to use the little feet.
he had to shuffle with his feet, and so there's taping on the floor to tell him when to stop shuffling. So you didn't see it in the film, but it was just like, I could just imagine him moving his feet very quickly, just to shift around.
Yeah, and this was interesting. I'd heard this as well, but Lucas spoke with a child psychologist and during the making of the film, and he was told that unless it was very clearly stated by a trusted source that Vader was Luke's dad, people would not believe it. And there were people at the time who did not believe it. They were firmly opposed to the idea. They thought Vader was lying because why would Vader tell the truth? You know, I remember seeing footage in some video of people who were theorizing at the time that Boba Fett was actually Anakin Skywalker in disguise, and he couldn't like reveal himself, like crazy things. But you know, fan theories get a little out of hand sometimes. But that is why Yoda says it in this movie. I mean, it makes sense for him to confess due to the plot anyway, but they had to have a trusted character confirm what Vader had said in the previous film, which is very interesting.
Wow, that's nuts that people would be theorizing like that back in the 80s about this.
I know. And no like theories or anything really, because I don't think, maybe there were forums, like early forums back then, but I don't think that, not really.
I bet it was just, mainly friends swapping stories and ideas.
They were theorizing in fan magazines. You could write into fan magazines, and those got circulated. That's what it was.
Back in the day, how far we've come. Now you can just pop online and there it is. But yeah, there's really cool visual effects in this film too. I did not know this until we started doing research on this film. But you know, the speed bike sequence where they're chasing each other, they're chasing the stormtroopers and trying to stop them from giving away the location of the rebel force on the moon forest of Endor. The way they shot that, the POV shots, they filmed on a Steadicam through the forest, just walking at normal speed while filming 1 frame per second. And then the final footage was just played back at 24 frames per second. So it's really quick.
So it's the reverse of slow motion then.
Yes. It's the reverse of slow motion. They had to physically go through and get that while they're just walking around. So I thought that was really neat. And then those speeder bike, the pass by noises where they're going, going by really fast. So that was created by splicing together thunder sounds with sounds of an airplane together, which I would have never guessed that's how they did that.
Well, and the speeders themselves, like the when they're riding them, they use rear screen projection for that. So they were sitting on the speeder just standing still, and then behind them was footage of the forest speeding by. I guess probably captured in the method you were talking about.
Yeah, maybe something like that.
You know, that was the green screen before green screen, right? Like matte paintings, rear screen projections. That's how they used to do all of this stuff before the technology evolved into something else.
Before we got the prequels and all the CGI that comes with them.
Right, and we throw a lot of shade at the prequels for the amount of CGI, but like George Lucas has always been very interested in film technology and pushing it forward, and maybe he pushed that blue screen tech a little farther than it was ready at the time, but he was a pioneer of filmmaking technology, and that's what he was doing. He was pioneering. The results, I think, are somewhat mixed, but respect where it's due. Like, he was pushing the art form forward in a way that has become pretty standard now.
Yeah, all kinds of cool stuff. The Rancor noises of the monster from Jabba's palace. So that was actually made from the noises of a Dachshund. Dotson. Sorry, I don't have dogs.
It's all right.
So I don't know how to pronounce these words. Yeah, a tiny little dog made those noises, and then they distorted it, I think.
Not a trivia thing, but speaking of the Rancor, I love just a little bit of humanity that's added into that element of the story. It's like when the Rancor Keeper comes in after Lucas killed it, and he's just like crying. And they're like, oh yeah, that's probably his pet that he's raised for years, and now it's gone, and he's sad. And it's a funny and sad little moment that adds to the texture of Jabba's palace as a location. Like there are characters and people that live there and do things, and this guy like had this pet that was used for horrible things, but he loved it.
It was his family. He loved it.
It's just a fun little detail.
Yeah, I remember hearing that the filming process for the whole Jabba's palace sequence took like a month.
Yeah, I can
It
imagine.
was insane. Like the hours were long. Like you had so many people to work with, so many extras. Like all those aliens in the background, everyone in makeup, and you're shooting. And then the puppetry of Jabba's thing.
It was like 7 people, I think,
It was
working
like
on
7
it.
people. It weighed like 2 tons or something like that. It was an insane amount of weight and an insane amount of prosthetics. So much money went into just creating a really good looking Jabba the Hutt puppet.
Yeah, and this is one thing that I'll harp on the special edition bit a little bit again, because one, the puppet Jabba in this movie is so much more impressive visually than the CGI Jabba in A New Hope. But also, why did we need to see Jabba in A New Hope? Now if that scene wasn't there, we have this build up to this character that's been hunting Han down, and then we see him and he's just this like monstrous slug thing. But in the special edition, we know what he looks like. We know who he is. So it's like a much bigger thing of the like Falcon reveal shot that we talked about earlier. Yes. It's like revealing these elements a little earlier than they should have been.
Yeah, it's whatever. We all know the iconic voice of the Emperor. Mm-hmm. So to do that, Ian McDiarmid, he based his like characterization of the voice on a Japanese method of just using your stomach to project. Okay. So that's kind of where that like the body, I would say, of his voice comes from.
You will pay the price for your lack of vision.
Just comes down from there, and that's how he projects it. I just love that voice too.
It's great. It's so fun. It's such a fun character. He's such a prick, and he just loves being a dickhead. Like he's just evil, and he's happy to be evil, and he has so much fun.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere online too that like initially like interpretation of the Emperor in the 5th one, he's a little bit more aristocratic, like he's a little bit more slow, and then in Return of the Jedi, he's evil. You know, so evil. Like he's cunning, he's manipulative. His whole demeanor is just kind of different, I would say, and that kind of set the tone for like future interpretations of the character and how they're going to bring him.
Well, and the Emperor wears many faces, right? Like he is that aristocratic thing. We see in Star Wars Rebels how he projects that like very kindly old man image of sort of how he was in the prequels to the citizens of the Empire. But in private, he's just a dickhead. Like, he's just a little asshole, a curmudgeonly little fucker. And I mentioned it before, and I couldn't confirm this, but the Millennium Falcon set might or might not have burned down, and they used a matte painting instead for the time they needed it. Yeah, and this was nominated for 5 Academy Awards and won one of them. And you got one more.
Yeah, I just got one small thing I found out. Small fact that Endor was actually the name of a village or a place in the Bible. Okay. It's actually... I don't know the entire details about it, or if it's even has any significance, but it was a village in Israeli territory, basically.
Also, another trivia thing, apparently, instead of Ewoks, the initial plan was for it to be Wookiees in this movie. And a lot of people say it would be better if it didn't have that. I disagree. I think the Ewoks are fucking hilarious, and I love them.
Well, the Ewoks are just fun, like goofy little things. In practicality, could they beat the technological superiority of an empire? I don't think so. But for the sake of this movie and the story, I think it works really well. Just like these tiny little creatures who are obviously very primitive in their technology are able to, to come together with the help of their friends and, win the day.
I am an Ewok defender. I think they're funny and cute. And the baby Ewoks are adorable.
Yes.
And also, not related to Ewoks specifically, but George has explicitly stated since these movies released that he, when thinking about the rebellion and what they were doing, very much based them off of the Viet Cong, the northern Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, and which is a very politically charged statement because then immediately in contrast, well, the empire must be America, and America is being portrayed by the very Nazi-coded Galactic Empire. Quite a statement, I would say.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was going that far, but
I think he very much was. Well, there's that interview with him and James Cameron where they're talking about how America has not learned our lesson about like the America is the modern day empire on Earth, right? And every empire who has come before us has fallen. They've overextended, they've overplayed their hand, and they've collapsed. The British Empire, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, Ottoman Empire, all of them. It happens it's inevitable. But it is very interesting that his inspiration was the Viet Cong.
Neat stuff. But yeah, the movie itself, pivoting away from the trivia aspect, the movie itself is structured a little similarly to the last one, where we start off with a little bit of a sequence.
That's true, yeah.
Our first little act is like an adventure that's not necessarily related to the rest of the story. It's its own little kind of narrative. So we get our Jabba's Palace act, and then the last 2 acts of the film take place more on Endor, and the assault on the second Death Star.
Yes, I would say it goes further than Empire Strikes Back, actually. Like, the Hoth sequence to me feels like an opening battle for the story, whereas the Jabba's Palace sequence almost feels like a short film to me. Yeah. It has a complete beginning, middle, and end, and it has its own antagonist in Jabba, who is defeated by the end of it, and then we almost have a different movie afterward, which is, it's very odd in a way. I like it, but it does, I think that is a part of the reason the middle sections of this movie drag a little bit, because we've already had a full like dramatic cycle. Yes. And we have to start back at a new sort of inciting incident, which is the plans recovered or whatever. But the Jabba's Palace stuff is so fun. It harkens back to the Cantina with the atmosphere, I think, and all these fun characters, and it's just creepy and gross. Jabba's nasty, Bib Fortuna's nasty.
Yes, the guards.
The guards, yep.
All the little characters that are strewn about the place are really unique, like the band and everything, like the blue snout
Max
guy.
Rebo is his name. And the special edition adds in that like rock song, which I've never had a problem with because I saw it when I was a baby.
Fine.
It's fine. I understand why people don't like it, but it doesn't matter to me, really.
I can listen to it once every 10 years, probably. Please stop.
I do love in this sequence when Leia is rescuing Han and you hear Jabba's laugh, and then they just pull back the curtain. Jabba and his whole entourage were just like hiding in the closet, just like, they don't know we're here.
We're gonna get them so good.
We got you.
You fucked up, yeah.
They're all there in the tiny little room.
Yeah. They're just twiddling their thumbs.
Yeah. Can we talk about for a second, what was the plan here? Just like they just send like one guy in at a time and everything goes wrong. It's like it works out fine, but like when they were like brainstorming this little thing, was this what they wanted to happen?
Yeah, like the plan is very complicated to get him out, where it's like, okay, the droids are gonna go, but first the Wookiees gotta go and get captured. Yeah. Lando's gotta go undercover somehow. The droids go in, and then Leia goes in. Oh, I'm getting it all mixed up.
Well, no, Lando's already there. He's undercover, and then and then the droids,
Leia with the Wookiee,
and then Leia with Chewie, and then Luke. But like, just think about like, what if Jabba had just been like, okay, you can have Han back. I'll take the droids. Like, what are you gonna do now? Are you gonna go and get them?
He's like, well, I guess not. Let's go to Endor.
Whatever. I'm just being a nitpicky asshole. I just think it's funny. Luke's intro though is so badass. He looks so cool, silhouetted, and he's using a little bit of dark side powers. He's like doing force chokes, mind tricks and shit. I guess mind tricks aren't dark side, but whatever. But yeah, like we mentioned earlier, this is, I think, the weakest film of the trilogy, but I still love it, and I think it has amazing sequences, some of the best in all of Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I think quite a bit of Endor drags a little.
Yes, I would agree. I think the middle part of the Endor sequence, it is a little slow, because I think that is the part where, yes, we had our action at the start, and then now we get a little bit of action on Endor, but then, there's this sequence of just like, okay, let's just spend some time in the Ewok village, let's world build, let's have some dialogue, let's recount some stories, and then Han and Luke and Leia have their moment where they realize they're
siblings,
and stuff. So I think that part, it drags a little bit.
Yeah, and the speeder chase is a fun sequence.
Yes, I love that.
But I think the problem is Han and Leia don't have a lot of character growth left to do at this point, because their story sort of culminated in a pretty satisfying way in Empire, and then all that's really left to do is save Han, and they do that already. So it's like Han and Leia get some fun moments in the Jabba's palace stuff, but on the indoor sequence, there's just not a lot for them to do anymore from a character perspective.
Yes.
Han is sort of just along for the ride at this point. And they try to do a little thing like, oh, could you tell Luke? Is that who you could tell? Like trying to complicate their romance a little bit, which doesn't really land for me. It felt that dynamic feels very forced, and it's over quickly, so whatever. But.
Yeah. Well, I think because they weren't sure if Harrison Ford was going to come back for the sixth one. That's why they put him in Carbonite. Yeah. So that way they could write him out of the story if they needed to.
Yeah, because he was the only one of them who had not signed on yet.
Yes.
I think it was likely that he would come back, but he wasn't confirmed, so they gave themselves an out.
Yeah, so I think that they probably didn't know when he said he was going to come back. They were like, "What are we going to do now?" Yeah. Like a little bit. I bet that's probably part of the writing process of, okay, so if he's coming back, how are we going to add anything for him to do for his character? Right. So I think, that might have had a play in it, but, aside, like, I agree that Han and Leia, they don't have much to do. They spend, like, I think you were saying it the other day, like...
it's like 25 minutes in front of that door.
They just sit there, like, okay, now the get the droids down here. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, now the troopers show up. Okay, I fucked up the door. Now it's even harder to get...
I do love when he throws that thing at the officer in the little thing.
Just hear the charges.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, and I think this is kind of probably where Harrison Ford's not hatred, but like lack of love for Star Wars probably started to manifest a little bit, because he's talked about in interviews like, I like doing the first one, I like doing the second one, by the third one I was kind of done with it. And from an acting point of view, that makes a lot of sense for a character in this script. And also another thing about Harrison Ford and his like curmudgeonly attitude towards Star Wars. Just you watching or listening at home, imagine you are his age, you've been working for decades, and all anyone wants to talk to you about is like the second job you ever did. I understand his second job with Star Wars, it's a big deal, but like, just imagine for decades that's what you've been dealing with. Like, you probably would have a little bit of resentment for that job too, because it's got to be really irritating, right? He's done so many spectacular films and had so many interesting characters, and so many people want to talk to him about is Han Solo.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate position to be in, to be just like so renowned for one single thing that you did
so early in your career.
Exactly. Yeah, like if people just knew me for my first job, for my second job, I would be really mad, honestly. Yeah. So I get his upset nature with it, for sure. Yeah. I mean, but on this flip side of Luke, or on the flip side of Han and Leia, we have Luke's segment with the throne room, with his whole development with Vader and his path to becoming a Jedi in this movie, which I think is the heart and soul of this movie. It's the part that works the most. His growth into the Jedi. He can only become a full Jedi, as Yoda describes to him, by confronting Vader, confronting this hard reality that he is related to this despicable kind of character in the universe.
And two side notes on that I want to touch on, actually. One that we talked about yesterday off air. But first, this like Obi-Wan and Yoda both tell Luke that he has to fight Vader and kill Vader, basically, or the Emperor has already won. And it makes me think back to, I guess forward or back to the Last Jedi, where Yoda is talking to Luke and he says, "We are what they grow beyond." And that's an interesting element of this movie, is that Obi-Wan and Yoda are wrong. Luke is the only one of the three of them who takes a different path and chooses compassion for his father, and that is what wins the day, not beating Vader. Because he does physically beat Vader, but when he does that, that is his lowest point in the fight. He's succumbing to the darkness and his anger to beat his father, and it's only in realizing that and stepping back and throwing down his weapon that he wins, and that's what makes him a Jedi.
Yes.
And I love that so much, and I'm praising The Last Jedi again a little bit here, even though it's not about that movie, but like, I love Rian Johnson for picking up on that and recognizing that Luke matured past where Obi-Wan and Yoda were in that moment and did the wiser thing that they couldn't see because they were from a different era.
Yes.
And that teaches, I think, us about something that we should be doing in our lives as well, is trying to be better than the generations that came before us and find a way that they couldn't.
Yes.
You know? And the other element of that is Luke's training. In Empire, we see Luke's training, he's there for maybe 4 days, if we're being generous, on Dagobah.
Yeah, like maybe a week, yeah.
Yeah, and then he comes back, and Yoda's like, no more training do you require. And I'm sure part of that is because in the interim, Yoda got sick, and he's dying, and he's probably like, look, man, I can't do anything for you. I'm going to fucking die. I also think that, and this is what we were talking about yesterday, is that a Jedi's training, I think, isn't a concrete like set of tasks or trials or anything like that. It's personalized. It's about what that individual needs, and it's about emotional growth rather than just a set of skills acquired. You know, and so Luke, having confronted Vader prematurely and being confronted with the truth that he's his father and not falling to the dark side, that is the training he required. And maybe, like, I don't know if George was intending this or not with the prequels, but you can look at the era of prequel Jedi and how they've institutionalized their training to such a degree and standardized it as a failure of that era of Jedi, you know? And maybe that's part of why they failed. And you could even go so far as to apply that to our education system today. Like, people do not all need the same standardized education system. People need more personalized things. And you could use that as a commentary on the state of our education here, which I think was very, you know.
That is very true. Yeah. But I think that throne room sequence, spectacular. You know, yeah, the way that he has to kind of let go of his emotions and control and find that balance between his inner conflict and what is going on before him. Yeah, the battle between light and dark there is very interesting. And one thing that I did notice, and I forgot to include it in the trivia, was that the word Sith is not used any time in the original trilogy, which I think is really cool. Like, it's in the novelizations afterwards, but like, yeah, you know, but it's like, I think the concept hadn't been fully adopted yet, or like he hadn't like coined it yet as like a thing. And so I think, I just think at the time you could view that a little bit differently as like there's no opposing side. It's just these fallen Jedi.
Well, or Dark Jedi. Yeah. Well, because I just finished reading Heir to the Empire, the first Thrawn EU book, and there's a Dark Jedi in that, and they just call him a Jedi. They don't have another word for him at that point in time, at least. But yeah, that is interesting that the word Sith and the concept of Sith had not been explored.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just like about this corruption and this balance, I would say.
Yeah. And I love the throne room. Like, the throne room scene is just so amazing. Like, the Emperor is a joy to watch, obviously, and he's just goading Luke this whole time, trying to, it's like, come on, kill me. You want to do it. If you do it, your journey towards the dark side will be complete. And he's just like egging him on, knowing that Vader will protect him if that happens. And he wants Luke to replace Vader by killing him, which is an interesting character dynamic right there. But Luke like just loses his fucking shit as soon as Vader finds out about Leia.
Oh yes, yeah, that's the turning point.
Which I will talk about more in our sequel retrospective in a couple of years, because that to me is a core Luke trait, is he acts rashly when his friends are in danger, specifically Leia. He does it in Empire, he does it here, and he does it later in his life, which causes the events of the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, when he's acting irrationally.
Yes, exactly. And that to me is why Luke is the way he is in the sequels. It's because he's like, I never overcame this flaw, and I cannot be trusted anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a good note for The Last Jedi, and the sequels was one of those few things that they did, I think, well as well. And I think one thing that I wish that the sequels, we kind of talked about this already, about like this film and the last film being broken up into like the first act, kind of unrelated to the rest of the film. I don't think we really saw that in the sequels, unfortunately, of having this kind of intro story.
No, we didn't.
Different, but at the same time, not every movie needs to be the same.
No, and I
could have done a little better, but.
And I honestly think the structure of this film works against it in some ways.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad the sequels didn't do that. So I think you and I differ on that.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a case-by-case thing. I think it's just like a little bit of repetition. You saw it a little bit in the prequels, especially with Revenge of the Sith, and with Phantom Menace as well, but I don't think you really saw it in the second one as much.
Right. And we do get a little bit more texture to the rebellion. We meet Admiral Akbar and Mon Mothma. We don't find out who Mon Mothma is in this movie. She's just there. But whatever. Yeah, she's, I guess, the leader of the rebellion, and Admiral Akbar is fun. He says magnitude in a funny way. He says it's a trap, and he became etched into the halls of pop culture for those 2 lines specifically. Iconic.
We love him for that. And yeah, I think the space battle around the second Death Star is just really cool. You know, you get some world building with the rebellion there too. You get to see some new classes of ships, like the A-wing. I don't think we've seen before.
No, A-wing, B-wing, which for some reason the B-wing looks like a T. That always confused me.
Yeah, me too.
Y-wings were in Y-wings were in A New Hope as well. Just on a technical level, even by today's standards, this space battle still blows my mind.
It's amazing.
I don't know how they did it.
All these miniatures.
God, it would have been so fucking complicated. Because all the fighters are flying in and out between the cruisers and the Death Star, and God, it's so fucking cool.
Well, yeah, and like I think the way that they, again with the editing, they, the tension keeps going up and up and up, in space, and on the ground simultaneously, because you have these 3 separate stories going on in the throne room, the space battle, and then what's happening on Endor simultaneously, and they're all working very well, complementary.
And 2 of them are directly linked.
Yes.
Like the fighters cannot attack the Death Star until Han and Leia get the shield down, and they are trapped and not able to do it. So it just God, it's just so impressive, and I love the like improvisation that Lando is like doing in the sky. He's like, all right, we can't do the Death Star. Just use the Star Destroyers to prevent the Death Star from shooting at us. And they're like, well, we won't last long. He's like, well, what else do you want to do, man?
Yeah, like we got no other options here. Let's just try it and see how it goes.
I love the A-wing going through the bridge of the Super Star Destroyer, and then it coming down, and then Admiral Akbar just gives that sigh of relief.
Oh, we did something up here. Yeah, it's very cool. And like during the trivia, I also forgot to mention that because there's so much going on screen, the special effects team at the time would just insert some random objects sometimes when they were just like, we need to add something, but like we just don't have the time to put a ship in. So they would do things like small little pieces of chewed gum or something like that in the background, and like awesome. you can't
tell because it's far enough away.
It's far enough away, and you didn't have the ability to like pause the movie. Right. And I think that they cleaned that stuff up with these like special editions and everything. But like, I just thought that was just kind of neat. They were just like, we need something, throw some gum in there.
Yeah, but I love the space battle so much, and like as a dramatic sequence, I think the A New Hope fight works better. It's very neatly builds to that pinnacle moment of tension where Han saves the day at the last minute in a very satisfying return. This doesn't work quite as well on that regard, but it is a really impressive space battle, and it's fun.
Yeah, it's very fun. There's a lot going on, and it works very complementary with everything else that's going on. Yes. Yeah, and I think the only thing left that we have on our show notes is talking about Luke and Leia being siblings, because obviously that was not part of the original plan.
No, it was not. Definitely not.
They kissed many times, as we've talked before, like even though some of those might have been on the cheek, but yes.
One definitely wasn't, though.
Definitely was not. We know that very clear.
So originally, and this is according to Gary Kurtz, who was the producer on Empire Strikes Back, this is a direct quote, "She is not his sister. That dropped in to wrap up everything neatly in Return of the Jedi." He's talking about his sister was someone else way over on the other side of the galaxy, and she wasn't going to show up until the next episode. Lucas originally was planning on making a lot more Star Wars, and there was going to be another series of films about Luke after Return of the Jedi where he would meet his twin. And that was going to be a big part of the next arc. And in some early iterations of the story, the Emperor wasn't even supposed to show up until like film 6. Which under the official numbering scheme now it is film 6, but you know what I mean. And it was going to be a much broader thing. And there were versions of this movie where Han died. There were versions where Luke died, I think. Oh, wow. And there was one where like Luke walked away into the sunset. And there was also one where the darkest one where Luke takes the helmet and says, "I am Vader now." and puts the helmet on and turns to the dark side. So they had a lot of ideas cooking around for this.
I think they made the right choice.
Yes, I do too. Ultimately, like, I'm very satisfied with the happy ending for this. But I do want to ask you about Luke and Leia being siblings. That has just been the case for our whole lives, so we never really like formed much of an opinion about it. But if you just, I don't know if you can even answer this or if I can answer this, but if you were a theater goer in 1983, do you think that would have been satisfying to you or not?
That reveal of them being siblings? I think yes, if I was a dedicated fan, because I think in Empire Strikes Back, because they were able to kind of communicate telepathically, and they have this kind of mind connection very briefly, I think that's enough foreshadowing to make it satisfying enough of, okay, they're blood related, so that's how they were able to communicate.
Exactly. Like, it works.
Yes.
It's not, but I could see, like, if you've spent years thinking about, like, I'm so excited to see who the other is.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, it's Leia. I'm like, okay. One of the very few other main characters, like, okay. But I think it works as well.
I think it works, but yeah, I think, there's two sides of the coin. I think, if you were a good fan and you were paying attention to the details, you probably wouldn't be too upset. Yeah. But yeah, I think there's definitely plenty of people who were probably justified in feeling betrayed or upset by it.
And I don't even know if there was a controversy around that.
Sure.
But it was just a thought that popped in my mind. And of course, we have the victory sequence, and both of us grew up on the special edition, so we grew up with the like celebration song and the shots of Naboo and Coruscant being in there. And
yeah, those are weird.
But like, I don't know. I've watched the original ending, and this might piss some older fans off, but I prefer it. I prefer the special edition one. I think the celebration dance song is better than the Yub Nub.
No, I think the song is better for sure. I think just like going to these other worlds and showing them really quickly, especially since we haven't been there, so like Naboo.
Naboo, yeah, I understand.
So like I think just like some of those planets, maybe they should have been a little bit more selective than the ones they showed. Like, show Tatooine, show Yavin 4, like show these like planets that we've been to. I think that would have been a little bit more fitting, but I'm not upset by it.
Yeah, I just like, I think it works even if you haven't watched the prequels. And if I'm ever showing Star Wars to someone for the first time, I start with the originals and then do the prequels. That's how I believe prequels are supposed to work, as a secondary thing to the original work. But even if you don't have the context of what those planets are, to me it just makes it feel like, oh, celebrations are happening across the galaxy. And then when you do watch the prequels and you come back and see Jedi after, it's like, oh, I know this place now. Yeah. So I think it works all right. And also, though, it's interesting because older people will have nostalgia for Yub Nub and have love for that. We have nostalgia for the celebration dance song. So maybe that's why I prefer it. Maybe Yup Nub is better. But I just grew up with this version, so that's my version, you know? Yeah. But it's a very satisfying end to the story.
I would agree. Yes, it's a satisfying end. It's not as great as the other two films, obviously, but I think as a whole, this trilogy is the most complete. It works the best. The vision was very clear, and I think a lot of the things that George wanted to communicate were very well communicated.
I agree. This trilogy is the one that works the best as a whole, and I think it's an important lesson that wasn't learned by certain writers, because if they came in and were like, well, what if actually Vader isn't Luke's dad? What if that was a lie and we do something totally different? Then this trilogy would not have worked as well. And we see that very clearly in The Rise of Skywalker. And that is something we will have to talk about with that trilogy, because like we've talked about in this episode several times, this trilogy was very clearly not as planned out as George likes us to believe it was, but they were very good at adapting what had come before and building on that, which is, we both did improv in college. The rules of improv, yes, and. You cannot just see the previous thing and go, actually, we're going to walk that back. We're going to do something different. Because
yes, and maybe not that.
So we'll talk about all that in a couple years' time, but for this trilogy, it works very well. even though like some of the seams are kind of weird, you know, Luke and Leia specifically, that's the biggest one.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's a very satisfying 3-film arc, and it also baffled. The ending is so perfect that it always has confused me, even as a kid, why people were so desperate for more Han, Luke, and Leia stories. I'm like, you got an ending, guys. The story ended.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Anything else that happens after this? This is a good enough ending. And yeah, I mean, the sequels exist, and we got to acknowledge that. And I mean,
I love 2 of them.
Yes, I mean, some of them are great, and there's a lot of great elements and ideas in them. But I think, yes, the sequels undermine a little bit of
the victory.
The victory that we get here at the end, especially with Palpatine's death. It's like, okay, so now we know that whole shit.
Yeah, that's the biggest blunder of the whole thing.
It pisses me off, and I think it pisses off a lot of people that they just basically brought him back. Yeah. Just kind of undercuts Vader's sacrifice at the end and his redemption.
Well, and the rebellion's victory in a sense too. But I will say, excluding the Palpatine thing, because I think that is full stop a mistake.
Yes.
Han, when we see Han and Luke and Leia again as older people, their lives have gone very tragically in the meantime. And I will say, after an ending like this, which has a very strong sense of finality, the way the sequels approached them is the only way to do it right. Mm-hmm. If they're just like the same people, or if they're all like living happy-go-lucky lives or whatever, it's like not interesting. Don't want to see it. Don't care. Because we got a very nice, complete story here, and it was done. And I love it. I love the original trilogy. Yes. Some of my earliest memories in life are watching these movies. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. I don't remember seeing Star Wars and Empire for the first time because I was so young.
Oh, me too. Yeah, I don't remember having that moment of like, that's his dad?
I know, because we were babies.
I don't remember it because it's just been a part of my life forever. I just know it as a fact. And these movies, I feel like I know all the beats by heart. I know the lines pretty well. Like, I think, I was watching this with my girlfriend a little bit, and she was watching over my shoulder, and I would say the line as it's happening because I know the line.
They're ingrained.
I know exactly what he's going to say right here. Yeah, but it's a fantastic series, and I don't know. Do you have much more to say on it? Or?
No, not really. But it's a happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you.
Thank you all for joining us today and listening in. We'll be back soon with another Rewind episode, and we've got regular content coming out.
Yep. Next Wednesday will be our episode on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 on the main podcast channel and all the audio formats. That'll all be linked below. So we'll see you guys there for that. And then I think after that is going to be Spider-Verse, which will be pretty cool.
Ooh.
So fun stuff coming up. This has been really fun. And if you have feedback for our in-person setup, please let us know kindly. This is our first time doing this, so we will get better, and we will try to get some more tech to help us out a little bit. Because as we found out tonight, filming this on my iPhone is very difficult. Until next time, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.